Get everyone in. Okay, should be more people coming in as we speak. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Islamic courses Zoom session titled Panel Discussion on Animal Rights and Husbandry and Welfare in Islam, Practice and Policy. We're honored to have Isabel from the Friedrich-Alexander University in Germany, Dr. Lutfi Radwan from the Willowbrook in Oxford, Mawlana Yunus Dudhwala from the Halal Monitoring Committee, and it's hosted by Dr. Mustafa Ahsan from the International Association of Muslim Scientists and Engineers. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Mustafa very shortly. Just a kind reminder to everyone, keep your PCs or devices on mute. It is being recorded. If you're not registered, leave your email address here. There is a Q&A session as well. Write them on chat. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Mustafa. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to welcome you all to this special session on animal rights and husbandry in Islam, and really sort of pleased and honored to have a number of distinguished guests who have a lot of experience, a wide range of experience in this field, ranging from activism to actual organic farming to the legal implementation of policies in regards to looking after animals and the halal aspect in regards to slaughter. So we're really, really happy and really excited that we're going to get some fruitful discussion from this session. First of all, I'd like to mention Isabel Schatzschneider, who's one of our speakers. She's a researcher and activist in animal welfare and food ethics, and she's also done work in the sphere of environmental ethics and Islamic ethics. She's graduated with a degree in philosophy from London University and has also degrees in Islamic Studies and Societies from the UK as well as Germany. So that's where she's originally from. So hopefully she'll be able to elaborate more on some of the work that she's been doing, and also a book that she's recently published, which I believe is in German, and there is an English translation of that coming soon. The second guest that we have is Dr. Lutfi Radwan, who is formerly a lecturer and consultant at Oxford University, and since his days as a lecturer, he's established an organic farm, a halal organic farm in Oxfordshire by the name of Willowbrook, and been doing a lot of work in the sphere of trying to actually revive the sort of true ethics and the true sort of spirit behind farming in a way that's in keeping with Islamic principles. And it's been an absolute revelation since it was established in the sort of early 2000s. And last but not least, we have Sheikh Yunus Dudhwala, who's one of the leading Muslim healthcare chaplains in the UK. Many of you will have seen him recently speaking about the importance of taking precautions during this period of uncertainty with COVID, as well as the importance of sort of looking at the Islamic principles that underlie the way in which we behave as Muslims in regards to health and well-being. He's also involved with the Halal Monitoring Committee, which many of you will be familiar with. This is one of the agencies that I've established nearly 20 years ago now, that were based with the intention of trying to get some sort of system in regards to how halal meat is slaughtered, and how the many butchers and the many services in this supply chain are regulated to ensure that things are done in the correct way. So he'll be providing some insight into that, and we can also ask questions to all our guests. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Isabel to say a few words about the work that she's been doing in the sphere of animal welfare, and also tell us a bit about the book that she's written, which I'm sure will be of interest to all of us. Dr. Isabel.
Okay, good. Assalamu alaikum to you all. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm very happy to be here, to get to know you. Thank you so much, Mustafa and Mizan, to invited me here to this panel. I'm very happy. Just a few words to my background. You introduced me already. I graduated actually from the UK, so therefore I'm very happy to be part here in the Zoom panel from an organization which is actually based in London. So my work all started in Qatar. My work on animal welfare and environmental protection in Islam. It started when I moved to Qatar after I graduated from SOAS, and I realized in Qatar that actually the way they produce their meat is, I was questioning it, if it is actually halal, because I realized that they're actually in the same style as the Western method produced in a mass production. So I started to do some primary research in Qatar, and I visited some slaughterhouses as well, and met some meat production companies. And what I was finding out was actually not according to the Islamic principles as I understood them in the Quran and in the Hadith. So, for instance, I was visiting many slaughterhouses in Qatar, and what I was seeing there was very cruel and very brutal and very sad what was being done to the animals. And I decided. Much better. I decided to refrain from eating meat, and then I started to tackle this issue from an academic point of view, and I started to work for the Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics, which is part of the Qatar Faculty of Islamic Studies, and I did there some primary research on animal welfare and environmental protection in Islam. After doing that, I moved back to Munich, to Germany, and I started to work for a foundation which is enhancing animal welfare and environmental protection. And there I was a researcher on the halal market in Germany. So I was doing for 1.5 years, 2 years, I was doing some primary research on the halal market field in Germany. And after that, I published a monography, a book on halal market standards and animal welfare, where I actually looked at the halal standards in terms of where does actually animal welfare appear. And my research, my findings resulted in that animal welfare actually only appears, if actually it appears at all, only in relation to the slaughtering itself. Yeah, so it's just a technical part, but in relation to the raising animals, the feeding stuff for animals, also the transportation to the slaughterhouse is not subject in these halal standards. And this is also my hypothesis, that this form of production cannot be titled as halal. It is you can label it halal, but it is not in line with our Islamic understandings of the Quran and the Sunnah, and also of the work of the fuqaha. Later, I also did some work on animal welfare activism in the Maghreb. I was in Tunisia and in Morocco. I was meeting there the activists. I saw the injustice also towards animals there, especially the street animals. And I did some panels on that matter as well. And now I'm actually writing my PhD on animals and justice in Islam. I'm going to finish it this year, inshallah, bismillah. And it also incorporates, my work from the last 10 years. I focus on establishing animal welfare rights in Islam in relation to theology, ethics, Sufism. I also have a chapter on dogs in Islam, because this is a matter, this is one topic which I'm very passionate about, dogs. And I also focus on the halal market and the animal welfare activism in Tunisia and Morocco in regards to street animals especially. So what I can just say shortly is that Islam did not just come for humans, it came for all beings, for animals and the whole environment. And as it is said in the Quran, and Muhammad was sent as a mercy for all worlds. So we as Muslims, we have the responsibility to take care and also fight for the rights of animals and nature. And there's the primary sources are so rich in regards to animals and their rights. I'm sure Dr. Lutfi is agreeing with me here. He has done a lot of work in that matter, and he has given talks in regards to the primary sources in Islam. So yeah, this just as an introduction to me as my person and my work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isabel, for sort of a very useful and interesting introduction. And the fact that you've sort of seen how animals have been mistreated, unfortunately, in just a couple of countries that you mentioned, Qatar and Morocco, is something that I'm sure many of us can resonate with. And so in that regard, I'd like to sort of now move on to Dr. Lutfi to sort of share a few words about his work in this field and his views on this. We will have a fuller discussion once the panelists have spoken, but I thought I'd just get the panelists to say a few words about what their view is on this matter and what sort of work they've done. So Dr. Lutfi, I'd like to you to.
Well, assalamu alaikum, and thank you for inviting me, but also lovely to hear a young voice talking with passion about an issue that really we have left for far too long. We've ignored, but then I sort of look at it as it's not just the Muslim world that really have become ignorant on this, but it's really an issue of separation that has affected all of the developed economies cut across the world now, that we by and large now live in very urban societies. We're very disconnected with the sources of the food that we consume, the materials that we use. Everything is packaged, everything is sort of presented to us in a very simplistic fashion, and we don't make the connections. So that's one aspect, is that we're powerless consumers, and we need to break out of that. We need to take the responsibility that we know as Muslims, the very essence of being a human, is that we are the khulafa fil ard. We have been given that vice regency, that stewardship, that responsibility. And what distinguishes us is that ability to choose, the free will to actually make a choice. And if there's a distinguishing feature of capitalist society, it is the removal of free will. We talk about rights, not responsibilities. Human rights have become a fundamental, individual human rights have become a fundamental feature of a lot of Western philosophy, which permeates around the world. But really what's lacking there is human responsibilities and the concept of communal responsibilities and communal rights. So I think we've lost a lot. Maybe that sounds amorphous, but you know, we can't really start talking about halal chickens in Qatar being kept in factories or killed in a way that's not acceptable without recognizing the deep roots of what is a systemic ailment that's affecting all of us, Muslim, non-Muslim, and charting a path out of that is something very important for all of us to address. And there's so much commonality. I was listening to the head of an organization in the UK called Feedback, which is trying to make changes to the way that people consume. And she was throwing up similar issues to what we're discussing today, similar approaches. And I think that's the key thing is really how do we invigorate, reinvigorate, how do we awaken people to the role of steward, the role of responsibility for the environment. So I won't go on too much. Of course, there's the lovely metaphor that does unite the whole of the Judeo-Christian and Muslim tradition is the idea of the expulsion from the garden. So at the very heart of story, the metaphor, or however you look at it, of the creation of man and the descent of mankind, humankind, to earth, is this expulsion from the garden. And in a way, the sort of raison d'etre for us being on earth and the whole purpose of our journey, our individual journeys, is to strive to get back to the garden, in a sense. So we're intimately connected with the environment, whichever way we look at it. Willowbrook Farm, just very briefly, is a simple farm. We've gone back to very traditional techniques. We farm the land as if nature matters. It has equal value in our eyes to everything we're doing on the farm. We're planting trees, we're rearing animals, we're doing the slaughter on site. Beyond that, though, as I say, you can't limit it to animals. We have chosen to build as many buildings as we can sustainably. The main building that I'm actually living in and I'm in at this moment is constructed entirely of clay, sand and straw, using natural materials from the farm, natural labor and techniques. We're laying hedges traditionally to encourage the hedgerows to be full of wildlife. I can go on, but what we're essentially doing is rolling back the years and saying, well, look, the traditional techniques of nature conservation are needed now more than ever. And that's what we try to do. The byproduct of that is that we do provide what we believe is truly halal produce for our customers who come to see us. I'll leave it at that for now, if that's okay.
Thanks to Dr. Lutfi for a really inspiring introduction to some of the work that you've been doing. And that was the sort of my initial reaction when I visited Willowbrook back in, I think, 2002, 2003, was that the idea was sort of to be consistent with nature. So not to sort of, on the one hand, promote organic farming and doing things in a truly halal way, but at the same time, start sort of using, consuming resources in a way that is at odds with what you're trying to do. It's got to be all or nothing, basically. And I think that approach is...
I think that's really crucial. If I can, sorry, come just back in for a second. I think that's really crucial when you have the option in Sainsbury's or Tesco's of a free-range chicken or something that seems to tick the boxes. But without that holistic approach, you might well go to that farm and you'll find that there's a whole range of business structures or machinery and ways that they run that business that's got nothing to do with the environment. They don't really care beyond the narrow confine of ticking a few boxes to produce a free-range chicken. Yeah, so we do like to try and strive to be holistic.
Absolutely right, and we'll get onto this later on, because sometimes people think, well, the mountain is so high to climb. There's so many different ways in which we're involved because of the way that we live in modern times, that, you know, if you do that little bit, you know, how are we going to sort of address all the other issues? But yeah, we can sort of go into that a bit later.
Sure.
So finally, I'd like to move on to Sheikh Yunus Dudhwala, who's with us today and who's been involved with the Halal Monitoring Committee amongst many other responsibilities. So if you'd like to say a few words about yourself. I mean, one of the things that, you know, we know in the Quran, when Allah mentions that we should be eating halal, there's always the word tayyib, which is mentioned next to it. So something that's halal, permissible, but also wholesome in the sort of, in the sense of the animal, the way in which it's been reared, the sort of whether it's the environment, whether it's the food that it's been given, all that sort of stuff is often sort of neglected. And I'd like you to sort of maybe touch on that, as well as anything else that you feel is relevant in this field.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Mustafa. I think this is a very important discussion that we need to have within the halal industry. So I'll just start off with what Dr. Lutfi mentioned, and he mentioned that the expulsion from the garden is common within all three monotheistic faiths. And there's an interesting story which comes out of that, where when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed Hazrat Adam and Hawa, his wife, to stay in Jannah, he only gave them one restriction. There was only one restriction. And that restriction was that do not go near this tree. It was about eating. That's the only restriction that we find that he Adam alayhi salam and Hawa were given in Jannah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya Adam uskun anta wa zawjuka al-jannata fakula min haythu shi'tuma wa la taqraba hadhihi ash-shajara fatakuna min adh-dhalimin. Eat whatever you want, but don't go near this tree. And what happened, we all know what happened. Shaitan comes and starts whispering, فَوَسْوَسَ لَهُمَ الشَّيْطَانُ لِيُبْدِيَ لَهُمَا مَا وُرِيَ عَنْهُمَا مِنْ سَوْآتِهِمَا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what happened is they ate from the tree. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala became angry. But one of the things that is mentioned in the Quran, and I just want to make this note, that whatever we eat, we find books in bookshops which say, you are what you eat. You are what you eat. But when we pick them up, it's mainly talking about the calories that we eat, and we become fatter, and we become like this, and we become like that. But Islamically, you are what you eat because it affects the body. It affects the spiritual heart. Okay. And in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what happened when they ate the fruit from the tree. فوسوس لهما الشيطان ليبدي لهما ما وري عنهما من سوآتهما وقال ما نهاكما ربكما عن هذه الشجرة إلا أن تكونا ملكين وتكونا من الخالدين وقاسمهما إني لكما من الناصحين فدلهما بغرور فلما ذاق الشجرة بدت لهما سوآتهما. That when they ate from the tree, their clothes fell off from them. They became naked. And they started to take the leaves from the trees to immediately cover themselves. What this shows is the restriction was, the only thing that was restricted was food, number one. And number two, there is a spiritual effect that happens if you don't eat the right food. And the spiritual effect, which is mentioned here, is known as immorality. Okay? The ulama mention that the clothes coming off means that today, in this day and age, if we eat the wrong food, it will lead to immorality. Spiritually, you will not realize it, but your body will be inclined towards immorality. That's just one point which I wanted to mention based on the expulsion from the garden. But in terms of Halal Monitoring Committee, as you mentioned, started around 20 years ago. And yes, I think when we look at majority, if not all, Halal certification bodies in the UK or abroad, one of the last considerations that they have is about animal welfare. And I'll put my hand up to that, and I'll admit that. And I think one of the reasons is because the industrialization of food is widespread. Okay, so everyone is eating from the butchers and the takeaways and the restaurants that are available in their area. Okay, and when we started, our main concern was that everybody is eating from here. Is it halal? Is it halal? And I'll go on to animal welfare but the concept of halal in fiqh and through the Quran and Hadith, that if there is an animal that is slaughtered in the name of God by a Muslim, and it's slaughtered in the correct manner, that 3 out of the 4 vessels or all 4 vessels have been cut properly, then that animal with the name of Allah will be halal. Even if it's an injured animal, you can pick up the books of fiqh, it's mentioned there. Even if it's an injured animal and it's cut, not deliberately injured, but even if it's an injured animal, then it's still halal. So the concept of halal, the minimum halal, is this. And what we were finding is that in the butchers that we have in the UK, in the takeaways, in the restaurants, even this minimum standard of halal is not there. Is not there in a lot of the shops. So we wanted to create an organization that would monitor this process. And when we monitor this process, we are not saying that we are 100% halal, because we're not there 24 hours. We are there when the animal is slaughtered. We are there when we label the animals and the meat and the poultry, and we are there in the shops checking every so often, maybe 3 days a week or whatever. If someone wants to cheat even then there's police on the streets, but burglaries still happen. Halal Monitoring Committee is a means to help people buy halal. We're not police. The real police is taqwa, that a person has in their heart that I want to sell the right product to the Muslim community. Okay? And that's why I always applaud what Dr. Lutfi is doing and other organizations that do organic, free range. And Dr. Lutfi is talking absolutely correct when he says that it's all about not only just the products, but the whole living. That is the true Islamic way. And I can't follow that and I can't argue with that. But what Halal Monitoring Committee is doing at the moment is trying to provide a service to the masses who are eating from industrialized food to make sure that even just a little bit that they eat, that they can eat at least a minimal standard of halal. Minimal standard of halal. And just to clarify, HMC halal only covers, for example, maybe 2% or 3% of the halal market. The 97 or 95% of the halal market is unsupervised, unregulated. It's not certified. It just says halal. And if you're going to ask me which halal would you eat more, would you eat HMC or would you eat Dr. Lutfi? I'm here as the chairman of HMC, and I'll say go and eat Dr. Lutfi's. Yeah, because that is organic, it's reared correctly, everything, and it's slaughtered correctly. So it's not about HMC. HMC is just a means trying to help the Muslim community to have minimal standard. And yes, I think we do have a duty to look at animal standards, but I don't think we are there yet in terms of even just controlling this small element of the halal market is costing us huge amount of resources. And we don't have the capacity, we don't have the means, we don't have the enough support from the community. And it needs information and education to the community. The community has to come on board. And the costs are also sometimes prohibitive to, we're in lockdown. We've been locked down for a year, maybe. There's people who are struggling. You mentioned earlier, just before we started, there are students who are here from abroad, international students who are struggling for food. Every 3 days, there's a food bank where there's a line of 1,000 students. Majority of them are Muslim. They can't even afford food. And there's many who are from this country who can't afford food. And that's, we're just talking about £1, £1.50 for chicken and chips. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that's ethical. The debate is not about, for me, I'm not saying HMC, what it sells or what it certifies is ethically correct. What I'm saying is halal in terms of the minimum standard of halal. And I'll stop there, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you very much for an honest and very clear sort of outline of what HMC has been doing and the reality of the situation that we're living in, that we're not under no illusions that HMC or other standards agencies are indeed confident that the way that the animals have been raised is indeed in line with Islamic principles and ethics. But we've got to start somewhere, and I think the setting of minimum standards is definitely something that the community was lacking. I guess the discussion now has to move into are we going to be content with minimalism, or do we need to now move on to the next level? And I think part of the problem, as you alluded to, was meat consumption itself. I mean, there's too much demand for meat. There's so much emphasis on eating meat and getting meat at an affordable or even cheap rate, is that ultimately suppliers will cut corners, and that's exactly what's been happening.
And just to mention, Dr. Mustafa, on
yes,
that
please.
issue, the Muslim community in the UK is maybe 3% or 5%. And according to the Food Standard Agency, about 25% of red meat is eaten by Muslim community. 25%. We are 3 to 5% in this country, and 25% of it. So you're right. The consumption of meat has to go down. Consumption of poultry has to go down. We need to become semi-vegetarian. Yeah. Don't worry. It won't. I don't get paid from HMC, and HMC doesn't need people to eat meat or poultry. What we need is the correct way of living in terms and the correct way of producing meat and poultry?
We've got a lot of questions coming through. One of the questions, I'm going to send it to you, Mustafa, so you can choose where you want. One of them has come up, is it realistically with 2 billion Muslims that we can have organic farms? You've got to have some industrial capacity at the end of the day. And with that, there has to be a trade-off between welfare and feeding people. Any thoughts from any of the panelists, Dr. Isabel, maybe? Or Dr. Lutfi.
First, can you hear me now?
Perfect, yes.
Yeah, I mean, as we just alluded to, the consumption of meat is a major problem. I mean, various figures are around, but there's sort of, it would take 1 kilogram of protein, 20 kilograms of protein to produce 1 kilogram of beef protein. You know, you feed it so much, so it's 20 times or 15 times less efficient than eating grain. A lot of the Muslim community come from countries where there's a vast range of vegetarian type diets. So I think really tackling this, you know, put simply, if we stopped eating meat, we could times the world's food supply by 5 or 6 times. That's not going to happen. But I mean, the simple question, is there enough space to grow organic food? It's not putting the question correctly. I think we really have to look at it from the other end, and it has to be in terms of consumption. We have to consider eating less meat. We're always encouraging our customers to eat 2 or 3 times a week only, and 4 or 5 days of eating vegetarian. So that's really important. I can't go into it too much here, but any arguments that try and say that organic agriculture or natural farming is less efficient, actually they don't know what they're talking about. I think if you look at the figures, by and large, commercial farming is extremely wasteful, and higher yields have been achieved. There have been various studies across India, across many parts of the world, where organic yields are actually much higher than commercial farming techniques, unless those commercial techniques are under very controlled conditions. So again, there's the possibility of growing what we need. It's not really an issue. I think it's a much bigger issue, but the basic is that we need to get back to education. If the consumer is not educated, he's not making real choices.
Yeah, there seems to be a bit of an intrinsic false belief that as Muslims, we need to eat meat, and that's somehow a characterizing feature. Whereas if we look at the Sunnah, I mean, the Prophet ﷺ hardly ate meat. I mean, it was like a luxury maybe on Eid or some special occasion when a goat or a camel would have been slaughtered, but those were rare occasions. And even if we look back at sort of our fathers and grandparents, I mean, 1 or 2 generations back, particularly in the so-called developing world, most people would be eating maybe meat once a week or not even that.
Absolutely.
My parents
actually, I just came across sorry, I came across a figure the other day on consumption. It was for something my son was doing at school, but it was broadly about 100 years ago, we were spending 50% of our income on food. Now I think we spend something like 4 or 5% of our income on food. So there's a massive change in the amount we devote to food. And the final point I'd make on that is, when you're buying that cheap chicken or you're buying this very cheap meat, there is a cost. Nothing comes free. There's a massive cost, and that cost will be the damage to the environment. And if it's not recouped through your taxation, it's going to be recouped through the actual destruction of the environment around you. So these choices are not really valid when people present that argument of, oh, well, we can't afford to spend more on food. Well, why on earth should you be allowed to pollute and destroy and do things a cheap way? If we applied that across the board to other areas of life, it could get ridiculous. If we gave people a free pass to whatever, to urinate in public places or to break property or to do ridiculous things and say, well, it's cheaper for me to do it that way. It's not an argument. If there's a cost, that cost has to be highlighted, and it's through education that people become aware of the real cost of their actions.
We've got a question from Dr. Emmy, who's a certified halal executive for Halal Assurance System for Food and Pharmaceuticals from Malaysia. So I'm just going to unmute. She's calling from Malaysia. So Dr. Emmy, if you want to ask, and I'm going to start your video as well. There we go. Over to you. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, go ahead. Bismillah.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm just want to share, Malaysia, we're still the same. We're having problem in regards to miseducation, miscommunication in regards to the usage of halal certification. So my question is, because we have a very structured program like halal assurance system that we impose to the industry. And again, I like to share with you guys, it's still a voluntary, it's not something, it's a must for the sector, but due to because we are serving the Muslim community and it becomes something a must. So most of the non-Muslim industry, non-Muslim owner are into doing halal certification, and they follow out. That's why we come up with halal assurance system. My question is, do HMC or any voluntary associations in UK setting up a halal assurance system that is sort of, I can say, non-Muslim friendly in order to serve the Muslim community? Thank you.
Perhaps Dr. Sheikh Yunus can take that one.
Yeah, I didn't understand the question fully in terms of non-Muslim friendly.
Can you hear me again?
Yeah.
No, what I'm trying to say, the owner of the company or the producer are non-Muslim. But we come up with a structure that halal assurance system is sort of friendly in regards, they understand it's not as, you know, what we call, what should I say in a good term, mean we are not savager, we are very into, yes. So we have a very structured halal assurance system in order for them to understand in a structured way. So I'm just asking to HMC, do you guys setting up a halal assurance system that a non-Muslim producer can, you know, understand and of can comply?
Thank you.
No worries.
So just to answer your question, we have a halal standard, and that standard is very easy to follow. Yes, Muslims or non-Muslims will understand what our standard is. We're not saying that everyone has to follow our standard, because we have a standard which is non-stunned and hand slaughter only. But others, we know that they do stunned, they do mechanical slaughter, etc., etc. We don't comment on that. What we do is we ask those who want to be under our scheme to follow this standard. But what we don't allow is the non-Muslim industry to certify on behalf of us. They can produce, but we will have our own Muslim certification people who will be there on behalf of HMC. And that's a technical issue in terms of fiqh about shahada, who can give shahada and who cannot give shahada for certification.
Okay, thank you very much for that question and the response. There's a question from Aisha Said, who's asking, some famous Muslim scholars suggest that if we stop eating meat, the animal population would soon become uncontrollable. Is there any value in this argument? It's something that I haven't heard of, but perhaps one of the speakers can elaborate on this idea of the need for meat consumption. Otherwise, there'll be sort of unsustainable growth in animal reproduction, etc.
I think my penny's worth as a farmer. We grow the number of animals that we intend to kill. I think if commercial industry, we're not putting in the chicks, we're not herding cattle lots full of cows, we're not clearing the Amazon to grow beef for McDonald's, we wouldn't have those animals. We're not talking about wild animals that we're hunting and needing to deal with sort of populations getting out of order. We're talking about commercially reared animals, which industrially reared animals, And if you look at hatcheries, that's probably the best way to see the problem. You know, we're rearing, I think is every, I don't know how many millions, but there are millions upon millions upon millions of animals being produced for meat consumption. If we stopped rearing those types of animals, it wouldn't make a difference. There's no argument there. It's not as if they're out in nature producing and multiplying and we can't deal with them.
Mustafa, there's quite a few questions which are hands up.
Yeah, I mean, just moving on to so related to that is, you know, there's a view that maybe this halal certification, whilst it is something it's beneficial, it's almost been used as a commercial sort of means of exploiting the market, essentially. So basically, this halal certification is becoming big business, and not just in the UK, but also in other parts of the world, where rather than sort of adhering to the spirit of Islam or trying to sort of regulate this and bring this into some sort of order, people are thinking, okay, this is a great way of making some more money, and it's become quite a large sort of operation, purely sort of motivated by finance, by money. So maybe, sort of Sheikh Yunus, I mean, how can we try and
it's a good question, absolutely good question. And I think, first of all, from a Halal Monitoring Committee perspective, what we have made sure is that the Halal Monitoring Committee does not belong to any individuals. So the HMC is a charity, and it's you know, nobody benefits. So although I'm the chair, I don't benefit from Halal Monitoring Committee. The directors don't benefit from the Halal Monitoring Committee, and I make sure that does not happen. Only those individuals who are the employees, they will get paid for working for HMC. Otherwise, but the point of your question is correct, because what's happening, unfortunately, is that those who are using HMC as their standard and using the halal certification of HMC, sometimes we are getting complaints that they are monopolizing the industry. So that because HMC has become very common and it's become very acceptable within some communities, the community only wants HMC, so the shops know that, and therefore they then up the price, which unfortunately we don't have control. And again, that is about ethics. It's about the ethics of, you know, why am I doing this work? Am I doing it for my personal gain, or am I doing it for the benefit of the community? And again, that's down to education. I speak to butchers and I speak to slaughterhouse owners, and I say to them, you will get the check at the end of the day and you will make profit, but don't exploit. Because at the end of the day, this is a service to humanity. This is a service to the Muslim community. So it is something which is we are aware of, but it's out of our control.
Thank you. We have Zinara Sheikh who'd like to say a few words. If you'll be unmuted.
Assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to say just a few comments, just adding to the discussion. I've been reading some articles recently, and I found that in the UK, it seems that halal monitoring is not working, not just in, you know, countries like the UK, where Muslims are clearly minority, but one recent report actually showed that 75% of chicken in the UK was not halal. It was mostly gas chicken. And the case is not very different in Malaysia, where there was news of a cartel that had been selling halal meat, quote unquote halal meat, for 40 years, but it was not halal. And some of it was even from horse and kangaroo. And I feel like the scale of production is simply too big for halal monitoring to be actually effective. And besides that, so many reports from the UN and from the World Economic Forum have shown us that we need a large scale shift to plant-based or vegan diets just in order to feed the population. One option would be what Dr. Lutfi says, to have the sort of small farms. But I feel like it's pretty clear that those options, besides not being sustainable on a large scale, just because we don't have enough land to let all cows graze free, is that they alienate working class people. It's very easy to say your cheap chicken is harming the environment, But many people can't dish out, I don't know, how much ever pounds the chicken costs from a place like that. But as long as the culture remains that Muslims need to eat meat, there's always going to be pressure and the likelihood that people are going to eat meat. So why aren't we advocating a move to vegan diets?
Anyone who wants to comment on that, please do.
I'll just comment on the first part of that question. I think I mentioned in my earlier introduction that majority of the meat and poultry in this country is unregulated. Okay, there's a lot of meat, a lot of poultry that comes from Europe. If they're coming from Europe, the rule is, or the law in Europe, that they have to be stunned and they have to be gas stunned. Gas stunned kills the animal before it's slaughtered. If it's killed before it's slaughtered, then it's haram, full stop. Yeah, and majority of European chicken is gas stunned and it comes labeled as halal and it cannot be halal. So there's lots of issues around that, and Sister is right, but it's unregulated. The whole problem with the halal industry in the UK especially is that it is unregulated. Anyone on here, and I'm not giving ideas hopefully, but anyone on here can print a halal certificate and you can put it on a chicken and say this is halal, and there's no regulation. There is no regulation whatsoever. The industry, or sorry, the councils do not have the capacity to go and check which shop is selling halal where it's got a label of halal. So if they've got a homemade certificate which is printed in their homemade computer, in their office computer, nobody can stop them. So I agree, we need to eat less meat. I'm not sure we can advocate for everyone to become vegan or vegetarian, because we still need a bit of meat and poultry, and I think that would be against the teachings of Islam to force people to become vegetarian when Allah has made
Correct.
something.
Sorry, Dr. Lutfi, I think you wanted to say a few words on this. I mean, this whole thing about economies of scale and whether this is becoming a bit of a middle class thing for those who can afford, organic chicken, 3 times the original price. And so how do we balance that, on the one hand, make it affordable to all, minimizing consumption, which is really at the root of the problem, and working in a way that's sustainable so that it's, it can be done in the long term.
Oh, how to solve the world's problems? Is that what you're asking me? Yeah, I mean, it is a very complex issue. I mean, if I can use an analogy, we are in a train crash. There are very serious environmental problems around us. Even taking COVID, we can look at the causes of the transfer of this virus to issues of animal welfare, caging wild animals, and then the cross-transference in dense conditions to other animals, and then the skipping the boundary to humans. Even at the moment in the UK, we're suffering a lockdown, you might not be aware, but an avian lockdown due to avian flu on poultry farms. And again, this is a natural virus that's out there, possibly held by even free-range chickens with no ill effects, but it manifests really bad ill effects in the factory farmed chickens, similar to the way that this virus got out. So you could even go down that tack of talking about natural immunity, maintaining our natural immunity, eating well, having resistance to disease. There are so many intertwined threads of what is a healthy, sustainable economy. But just looking at the question from Sister Zinara on whether there is a need to, for example, stop eating meat and go vegetarian. Small farms are actually doing reasonably well because people are prepared to put in that extra effort to look for healthy food. In Oxfordshire, we have a number, probably about 8, 9, 10, maybe 15 farms, people doing similar things to us, organic dairies, vegetable production. We're selling in the local farmers markets. We obviously, as Muslims, have a Muslim-based clientele as well. It's a sort of growing movement. It is very small, it's scratching the surface, and I'm not going to claim I can solve the world's problems, so I don't think that's necessary, but you have to be following the right path, doing something positive. Now, mixed farming requires, well, I would say good farming requires mixed farming. There are a lot of the outputs from the chickens, the sheep, the manures, which feed into our veg production, and vice versa. A lot of the produce from the veg areas go back into the animals, and it's a very symbiotic relationship. They both benefit from each other. So a healthy environment often is a mixed farming environment. As we'd said earlier, we are productive in the sense that I think we can compete, providing you take on board real costs and look at the real impacts of what's happening. And another aspect maybe to look at to tackle this issue of whether we should go vegan is the wastage. Current wastage in the global food system is extremely high. They say commercial farming loses about 30% in production from the field, and then a further 30% is lost from farm gate or production factory gate to the retail outlets. So that's a lot of food that is lost in very inefficient, very chemically based production. So there are a lot of questions also that need to be taken on board alongside it, though I'm wholly supportive of any moves to increase the vegan diet and reduce meat consumption. That's definitely something we should be doing, because what we'll be cutting out is not people like us, not the small sustainable farms, but we'll be cutting out this horrible good thing. I don't know if Isabel has any comments. I hope we're not being very male dominant and keeping her out of the conversation, but I'd like to hear maybe her views.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Lutfi. Yeah, I have some comments on what has been said so far. I think there's not a one straightforward answer to the question, should we refrain from eating meat now completely? Yeah, if this is an individual choice to refrain from eating meat, then definitely it's a good thing to do, because an animal didn't die because you wanted to eat meat. The environment is also being protected, because the meat industry is causing a lot of damage actually for environmental pollution, and it's also one of the main causes for climate change and global warming. So definitely we should be aware of that, and also as Muslims we can make a change through our individual actions. So there's no straightforward answer, should we as Muslim refrain from eating meat, but I would say definitely it is a good thing to do. Yeah. I have some comments as well on what Chef Yunus said in his introduction. And first, I want to tell you that I really liked your beginning about the story of Adam and Eve and how they're being deprived of paradise because of eating. Yeah, it was because of eating, and I haven't thought about that fact. Yeah, I know obviously the story, but I didn't consider it in that particular way. Yeah, so thank you so much for bringing my attention to that particular aspect of the story. It was about eating. Yeah, so we should, as Muslims, question really our action in relation to what we're eating. Yeah, we eat, we are what we eat. Yeah, you put this very nicely. And this also reminded me on my work, because when I read the Quran and the primary sources, I read from an animal welfare angle, from an animal angle. So many people always tell me, I have read this verse in the Quran, but I haven't seen it from that perspective. And this is exactly like what my work is about, and many other scholars who have put their emphasis on animals in Islam. They read the Quran from an animal angle, from an eye from an animal. Yeah, so this is what I wanted to comment on Sheikh Yunus' beginning. And then you said, well, what you do, you certify the minimum standard, and you certify the technical procedures like the slaughtering. So it has to be a Muslim, and it has to be cut in a particular way, and then this meat becomes halal. Yeah, but here I want to emphasize a little bit, and also I want to talk a little bit about these matters with you, and with all of you, in fact. This part is one aspect in the Quran, yeah, that it has to be a Muslim, and we have to say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, and it has to be cut in a particular way. This is one aspect in the Quran which makes the meat halal. But there are so many other aspects in the Quran, principles, normative orders in regards to animal and their welfare, which also should be considered in what makes the meat halal, what makes the animal halal. Yeah. Like we have to respect and care for animals because they're the creation of God. We have to respect and care for animals because they're a sign for the creator. In fact, it is actually as well a principle, it's a relation to Tawheed. Yeah, like one sheikh from Qatar, Ali Karadagi, he was writing a paper on environment and the Maqasid al-Sharia, and he mentioned that, and I found it very nice, and I wanted to share this with you. He made the analogy with Tawheed and Iblis. So Iblis, he did not have an issue with La ilaha illallah, with believing in the one God. In fact, he was one of the jinns which were on a very high position in serving God. Yeah, but he was so arrogant and not prostrating to the creation, to human mankind. And that was the issue of why he was being cursed by God. Yeah, not because he rejected La ilaha illallah, because he was too arrogant to prostrate in front of the creation, human mankind. So what does this imply for us not treating animals in a good way? When we look at these principles in the Quran, should there not also be applied in the halal standards to make the meat, in fact, halal and tayyib? This is what I was thinking about. So maybe you could emphasize on these aspects. And also I'm wondering, why is it so difficult for like a halal certifying committee to also certify?
Isabel, I think you're muted. Could you unmute yourself, please?
Mizan?
Okay,
Yeah.
Could you hear? I just repeat what I was wondering about is, why is it so difficult for halal certifying committee or halal certifier to also certify aspects like how the animals were raised, how they were being transported, and also if certain animal welfare aspects being applied during the slaughter. Also, one aspect that I have seen in my work and when I was visiting the slaughtering houses is that the animals actually do not have time to die. Yeah, they do not have time to die, and there's no regulation in the standards which actually is emphasizing on, okay, after you have set the cut, wait 5 minutes so that the animal can die. You know what I mean? So these are just some aspects and thoughts that came in my mind, and maybe we can talk about that now.
Mustafa, should I come back on that a little bit?
Yeah, if you briefly come back on that, and then a question.
No, exactly. I think I really have a lot of admiration for what you've said and your work. I didn't know about your work, but Mizan put me in touch with your work, so I'm really happy to hear about your work. Just a few points. I think you're right in terms of respect and care for animals. These are from our principal sources. For whether it's the Quran or whether it's the Hadith, there is no ambiguity in terms of every thing that has life has to be treated with respect. Has to be treated with respect. So there is no contention in terms of respect and care of animals. Where I think the issue I don't think it's an issue of difference. Where the problem lies is that you've got an industrialized industry, which has a European welfare standard, for example, or a British welfare standard. So if you go to the government and the Food Standard Agency and you say, we are not going to certify any animals halal because the animals are not being treated well, they'll say we've got a standard which is one of the best standards in the world. And unfortunately, it is one of the best standards of the world, but it doesn't get to a standard where we are rearing organic or free range or, to that kind of standard, which is natural or sustainable. It's not that kind of standard. It's a standard which is much below that kind of standard, but for them, it's the standard, which is the European welfare standard. Now, if we were to insist on only certifying those kind of animals that are at the standard of which are organic or which are free range, which Dr. Lutfi does, and we do have HMC certified organic available. We do have HMC certified free range available, alhamdulillah. But majority of the stores that we certify don't do that kind of, and majority of the Muslim community don't eat and don't order from there. And that's where the dichotomy is for us, that do we then not certify at all, because all we'll be certifying is about 100 animals a week. And that's not going to help the Muslim community. Yeah? Or do we certify and then try and raise the standards and the information and the education through means like this? And I think for us, we've got to go for the minimal standards. And just one more last point. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions tayyib and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions halal. Okay, but sometimes, and this is a technical discussion between the fuqaha and the mufassirin and the commentators of the Quran, but just to put it very briefly, some people are very adamant in when they say that, oh, the Quran says that the food that we eat has to be tayyib and it has to be halal, tayyib and halal. And what we find that they are both, one has a degree, which is the halal is what is fard, halal. And tayyib is synonymous with halal. Yes, it can mean wholesome, but sometimes the Quran uses tayyib on its own without the word halal. For example, in the Quran, Allah says, "Kulu min tayyibati ma razaqnakum." Eat that which is tayyib from that which we have given you. Now, if somebody takes that verse on its own and says, okay, well, this is wholesome, and this is, well, this pork is wholesome, and this animal is wholesome, then it will not work, because you have to take the whole context of the Quran together. So tayyib and halal are both, when you look at both the words, they are both coming in the meaning of halal, but sometimes they are coming in the meaning of wholesome. And the technical ruling is that halal is absolutely minimal, has to happen. If it's not halal, you can't eat. If it's halal, but it's not tayyib, you can still eat, but it's not ethical. Okay, so we need to understand that from a fiqh perspective, from an Islamic perspective, in terms of what the fuqaha have made us understand. But the best is, and I'll give the advert, go to Dr. Lutfi and go and get his meat and whatever he's providing, because there is no argument there, there is no contention there. For me and everyone, you can't argue whether free range and wholesome and organic is the best. There is no argument there. It's how do we get there? And I think Zinira mentioned very clearly the problem that we have is, and it's a huge industry out there, and you've got people who can afford this and not afford this, and you've got people who are producing this en masse, you've got people who are producing in a very, very small. How do we then balance? And we need to reduce the consumption of meat and poultry and try and find the best halal.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the clarification. We have sorry, Isabel.
Yeah, thank you so much for this comment, and I see where you're coming from, and thank you for answering my concerns here. I also think that we have to tackle that issue from various aspects, and the holistic approach, which has to come from the consumer. Consumer have to change in the way they eat, but also we have to train imams and theologists and also scholars in terms of animal welfare and environmental protection, and that the world has changed. We're not anymore living in the last centuries. So the world has changed, and also now the Islamic principles have to be reapplied to this new situation. And we unfortunately are currently producing in a very commercial and mass production way. But also from the political side, there needs to be changes in terms of the prices of meat, and also welfare regulations needs to be improved. And also one aspect that I would like to share with all of you, and I'm also keen to hear your opinion, is the situation of the chick culling. And I'm not sure if you heard about it. It's the male chick culling, which is taking place right now in the egg production industry. So what is the background of that? Is that at the moment worldwide 7 billion day-old male chicks are being culled because there is no economic benefit for them. So since a couple of centuries, there are only two poultry breeds. One is for the egg production, like laying hybrids, and one is feeding hybrids for the meat production. Yeah. So the problem is now that the breeds for the egg production, they are laying a lot of eggs, but they're very poor in producing fat and muscles. So they're not good for the industry, like for slaughtering them and to make meat out of them. Yeah. So what is being done since centuries now, these male chicks are being shredded. They're being killed just after they're being born, like they're, how do you say, like hatched, exactly. Thank you so much. So this is one welfare issue that is happening at the moment. There has been some legal changes from Germany, in fact, and also in the European Union now, they're going to put an end to that production method. So now also my point of view here is, number one, I have been doing some research on that matter in terms of Islamic opinions and fatwas, and I haven't found any. I have searched in Arabic, in English, and in French, and no opinion I came across which is tackling that issue in terms of, is it actually halal to eat such eggs which originated from such a production where male chicks are just being killed, shredded, without that they're being used for the food industry. Yeah. So this is also something that I would like to discuss with you. What is your opinion on that? Can we Muslims eat such eggs? Can we have a good conscience in relation to eating these eggs? And also, again, no halal standard committee certifier is tackling this issue, is putting this in the halal standard. Yeah, but eggs are only halal or should be halal or for Muslim consumers to be eaten if they are not originated from that kind of production. I know I have been living in Qatar for a long time, and French eggs and also European eggs are being sold there. So apparently it's not a problem at all.
Right, Dr. I'm sure you want to go on to other topics, but if I can respond on that point. There are so many threads to what we're doing that is, if we want to call it haram, but certainly the full halal, as Sheikh Yunus is saying, the full halal is difficult to come by. But just as a very small point, again, in defense of small farms, we rear on our farm a fully outdoor bird which enjoys living 14, 15 weeks on the range. We're at the moment crossing between an Australorp and a light Sussex. Now, these were traditional, what were called dual purpose birds, because they could lay eggs quite productively, maybe not as efficiently as the modern hybrids, but they lay enough eggs. And that's a good word. Enough is something that actually Muslims need to think about. Not what we want, but what's enough. Now, the Australorp and light Sussex crosses that we have, we produce male and female, obviously. When we see which is a male and a female at about 6 weeks, the females go into our laying houses and they have a productive life as our laying birds, and the males are reared on for meat. So we actually use, we don't get involved in that. We know about what's happening in the industry, and there are ways around it. The ways are to show compassion, to work with natural breeds, to accept less and less often, and to pay the true environmental cost of doing things the halal way. Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. We have so many questions, and this topic could go on for a long time. I'm conscious of the fact that it's also coming up to Maghrib time in the UK, but we will continue for about another 15 minutes. I'd like to bring in Asif, who's had his hand up for quite some time, and then Anjum, and then we'll then move into sort of solution mode if we can, because I mean, there's so much we can comment on, but we can maybe look at one or two ways in which how we can remedy the situation, at least something that can be done practically. So Asif, if you'd like to comment.
Yeah, hello. The thread that I'm getting here is there are two things people are mixing. One is a moral argument for not eating meat or meat at all, and there is another this environmental argument where we have to check ourselves, otherwise in future it will be a disaster for human existence itself. So the moral argument which some people want to incorporate in Islam is also can be seen in India, where Jainism has this philosophy that you have to minimize the violence whenever it is possible, and this argument many times syncs with many people, even some Muslim people, who thinks that being vegetarian is showing kindness to animals. However, since the moral argument is kind of subjective, we have to take guidance from Quran and Hadith. And since we have a festival of this Eid-ul-Zoha, where we sacrifice animals, etc., obviously eating meat is halal in Islam, and it should continue. And the amount is not there is no restriction on the amount also, that you cannot eat more than some amount. Something has been discouraged, that you should not overeat, but nothing has been haram in that section. So we have to separate the moral argument from the environmental argument. For our survival and existence, yes, we need to think about what should be the best recourse, and we Ummah together can standardize some practices and can think about what kind of local, what kind of structure we can build around this meat industry, where we can take care of the animals as well as we can feed Muslim Ummah as well. So I think we have to separate the moral argument from the environmental argument. That is the point I'm trying to make.
Thank you, Brother Asif, for clarifying that and mentioning the distinction between the two aspects, which do get sort of conflated very often. And I think you wanted to mention something that you'd like to turn on your mic.
Yes, assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you very, very much for your contributions. It's been a really enlightening talk. There's several elements that I'd love to ask questions on, but I'd first like to commend Isabel, Sister Isabel, for her comments. It's good to hear this being discussed on a public platform, and inshallah it will bring us all awareness, inshallah. I'd like to, having worked in environmental and planning in the legal industry for a little while, it's interesting to hear this discussion because we talk about it in the framework of, English law, the principles of English law, but really as Muslims we should be championing best practice. And I don't think waiting for government to kind of have that same level of importance on issues is really the way forward. And I think as Muslims, we should be acutely aware of our responsibility as custodians of the environment and holding ourselves accountable. And I think partly the reason that there's a disconnect is because we're not growing things ourselves. We're not connecting with the earth in the ways that we should be. And if we did that, then I think if we understood the time and effort it takes into growing, and also the kind of abundance with which we can grow things in blessed spaces, then I think there would be a greater appreciation and would be kind of distancing ourselves from this almost unyielding greed that we seem to have been indulging in, which is unfortunate. And I think for that reason, I think I am a little bit concerned that we don't have a broader vision as to how we're going to, as a community, approach this. And I think that lends to my question, which is, I appreciate that there is a difference between tayyib and halal. What I'm not quite sure, which is slightly unclear to me, is why that distinction cannot be made, even if it's only a minority of producers at the moment, why that distinction cannot be made, because I think the distinction in certification in itself will raise awareness, and individuals will be more inclined to perhaps be making better choices, because I think there is education out there. It's just whether or not the Muslim community want to be the ones taking this forward. And I see no reason why we can't be those people. We know what our responsibilities are. We know where we should be standing on this spectrum. And I would just like to ask those who are perhaps in a position to and much more well enlightened on the procedural aspects of this, to be able to tell me why that's not the case, why we can't make that distinction now.
I mean, if I can bring Sheikh Yunus in and all the others as well, but it's you know, given that you have strong links with the Muslim community, I mean, what can be practically done in terms of raising awareness? I mean, can the imams be can there be a program where they give khutbas, you know, talking directly about the importance of animal welfare, about heating things that have been raised in the correct way? So that's one angle, outreach work that can be done, practical things, because I think that the issue, you know, to solve it in one day is going to be obviously impossible, but there might be certain things that can be done, easy, quick wins, and being plugged into the Muslim community in terms of the scholars, as well as the learning that happens in the madrasas and the makatib. There must be something that can be done practically to try and get that awareness.
Yeah, I think the point is important, which Sister Anju mentioned in terms of halal and tayyib. So there's lots of halal certifiers out there, some who are genuine, some who are just printing halal certificates without doing any monitoring or without doing any due diligence. And those who want halal and tayyib, everyone knows which farms to approach. And those are the places that they buy their meat and poultry from, whether it's Dr. Lutfi or whether there's other farms in the country. That's already happening. I think in terms of Dr. Mustafa's question, the problem that we have in the UK, we're a minority, but we eat a lot of meat and poultry. And the debates that we've had previously are mainly to do with halal. What is halal? And everyone then focuses on stunning, not non-stunned, mechanical slaughter, etc., etc. And I think the starting point for people to start thinking about this area is to move it away from halal, move it towards environment and animal welfare. Even the imams, you have to start getting them to think about animal welfare, environment, sustainability, all those environmental issues, which frankly speaking, they're not on our agenda. They're just not there, right? So in reality, we don't think about that. We have all grown up in this country. Now you've got lots of young imams under the age of, like me, under 30. I mean, I'm only joking. Yeah. So young imams who have been brought up in this consumerist society. Yeah. And consumerism is an illness which has pierced into our hearts as well. So we're not used to talking about the environment. We're not used to talking about the issues that matter in terms of these sustainable and organic and free range, etc., etc. And we've got to, the other point I was going to make is that we've got to get our allies from different communities and join forces with them, because the issue is around sustainability, it's about environment, it's about animal welfare, and that should be the headline. If we start talking about that, then we can come down to the level of organic halal and free range halal, because that's where it will happen. If you try and work upwards, we get stuck in this debate around stunned, non-stunned, mechanical slaughter, this issue, that issue, that we've already dealt with for the past 20 years. We need to move on to the sustainability and environmental debate.
Absolutely. I would agree with that very much, because we're talking about a way of life changing. You know, we haven't even touched on so many issues, but look at our clothes. What are we wearing? How much of what we're wearing is sustainable? What sort of fossil fuels have been used in the production? What plastics? What everything else around us? It's not really not just about food, but this is a much wider thing. We do like to feel that we're starting that debate a little bit. Firstly, by starting halal production and tayyib production, but more than that, what we do on the farm is we invite people to come and see what we're doing and actually immerse themselves in a different way of interacting. We have open days, even through the last year, we were very well attended, 50 to 100 people coming on a weekend. That's 5,000 people a year just coming to our farm, witnessing different ways of utilizing resources. When we shear the sheep, we spin the wool on the farm. When we have any produce, we turn it into produce, jam making, cheese, whatever it is we're doing. We want people to see the connection between the animal, the environment, the land, and actually witness that themselves. And then they leave feeling that they've got a new perspective. And I think that's something that we've got to tackle. It's really got to come from the education. There's no point shaming and looking at the industry. I think we've got to say the industry is a collective of our desires, and we need to change the way that we look at the environment, the way that we interact, the way that we think. And from that comes so much, because what we've lost in urbanized societies is that sense of community, that relationship with each other as well as with the resources. So there's a very complex thing, but education has to be at the heart of it.
And one more thing, Dr. Mustafa, I just wanted to mention, because when we grew up as kids in Maktab, in the madrasas, we've never had any subject or chapter on the environment. So I think the Maktab resources really need to focus on this issue if it's not already doing so, because that is part and parcel of Islam, as Isabel mentioned. She's done the research, and you know our primary sources talk about our connection with the environment, with the nature, and it's not there. And that's why we grow up thinking that everything around us is fine. But where Maktab instills something in our minds, it will stay with us for a long time. And I think that's where we need to try and target the younger generation.
Definitely. And I think certain other traditional societies, like in Indonesia, where the pesantren system, which is like the maktab, they actually have a subject that talks about the importance of looking after the environment, the importance of looking after animals and other creations of Allah. So I think similar sort of thing needs to be introduced to the UK as well as other parts of the Western world, where they have that similar awareness, because we are, let's be honest, we are disconnected from nature, living in environments, whereas maybe people living in sort of more sort of rural communities have it sort of naturally as part of their position and understanding. We are sort of running out of time, but there's one final question from Brendan Keegan. If you'd like to open your mic, and then we'll round up soon afterwards. If you can keep it brief, please. Thank you. Brendan? Okay. Since we're short of time, if you're not able to speak, then we'll just round up. If each of the speakers can just give us a summary, a 1 minute. I know it's very difficult, and you know, and I know you're all available. So if people have any questions, you can contact us and we can direct them to the three speakers, because each of them has their own specialities and certain emphasis that they can sort of bring to this discussion. So definitely we are open to that. So if anyone wants to ask questions later on, it can be communicated through email. I noticed Brendan has come online. Did you want to say something?
Sorry, it's my husband's.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I couldn't really know. Such a good. I love this. Yeah, it's high time. Things you were saying were really relevant, pertinent. Yeah, I'm part of an environmental movement, kind of grassroots environmental movement, and our kind of Muslim chapter. This is exactly what we're discussing: how to, you know, create this awareness and sort of information sharing among the Muslim community. Thank you so much. Jazakallah.
Thank you. So we'll now round up with some conclusions. So I'll start with Isabel, and then Sheikh Yunus, and then Dr. Lutfi. One or two sort of practical things, and just your final thoughts on this really important yet complex subject.
Yeah, so firstly, I want to thank you again for inviting me, and I'm so happy to get to know you all, especially Dr. Lutfi and Sheikh Yunus, and I hope we can keep in touch. Then what are my thoughts, and also my future thoughts, what I would like to happen in the future is, number one, as I think it became clear from my arguments, is that animal welfare is being much more incorporated into the halal standards. So that also how we raise animals, the feeding of the animals, and also the transportation, and also in terms of making the slaughtering as easy as possible for the animal, is being incorporated into the standards. That would be a great wish for me for the future. I think as well, what would be my wish is that there's maybe like a uniformed halal standard. One problems that many Muslims consumer have at the moment is that there are so many standards, so many certifiers. I'm seeing Sheikh Yunus is smiling a bit. He's agreeing with me, I guess. It is completely, for a consumer, it's so confusing. Which standard saying now? So there have been some. There were some attempts in the past which tried to make a uniformed halal standard, but it didn't work out because of differences of opinions. Now the UK is not part of the European Union anymore, but I still hope that there's maybe like a British halal standard or a European halal standard. So this is something I wish for the future. And as we already discussed as well, I think there needs to be some trainings for imams and Islamic scholars in terms of the environment and animal welfare. I have heard a scholar from Indonesia, and actually Indonesia is quite progressed in terms of environmental protection, and they're already incorporated in every imam training, a training on environment and environmental protection. It's just part of their training. If you want to become an imam, you need to go through through these topics as well. So yeah, these are just my concluding remarks. Thank you so much to all of you that you have been here today.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a great idea. I think I mentioned it once to one of the ulama in the UK, was regarding introducing a sort of a unit on Islam and the environment into the Darul Uloom syllabus. And because at the end of the day, I think the years 5 and 6 is where students are prepared for how to sort of apply their knowledge and understanding to the wider community. And I think that would definitely be there. And I think Sheikh Yunus agrees that this is something that could be pushed.
My concluding remarks is this kind of event is extremely useful, and it's important for us to keep on reminding ourselves of what the Quran and Hadith says about nature, about environment, about animal welfare. Sometimes we, being in HMC, sometimes get lost in that industry because that is the industry that we work in. So this is really important. I'd like to thank Isabel, Dr. Lutfi, Mustafa and Mizan for being here today, and especially putting us together and discussing this issue. And I think one of the most important points to take back, I think for me, is how can we get a syllabus into the maktab system, into the children's maktab system, which talks about environment and animal welfare, because I think that is where we ingrain within the students and within the youngsters what is important within Islam. And yes, they learn about wudu and salah, which is extremely important. They learn about halal and haram, but what about this area? And I think it's something which I will definitely look into.
Excellent. And finally, Dr. Lutfi, I mean, we've spoken a lot about the education side of things, and everything does begin with education, but there's probably some sort of small scale implementation that can be sort of actioned. And perhaps is there something, one or two things that we can do right now? I mean, clearly there are bigger sort of challenges of getting everyone all unified, but that's not going to happen sort of soon. But there are one or two things that we can do right now. Perhaps you can sort of share those with us.
Yeah, well, I think obviously I agree with everything that's been said, but I probably come from a different direction. I spent the first half of my life as an academic and working overseas on sort of more grand scale, let's solve, you know, sustainable development in Africa, and realize that things don't change. Institutions are very difficult to affect. And I very much looked at it from the other side, and I'll maybe stress that now, is that ultimately this is an individual responsibility for all of us. And we have to make those choices. It may well be that Allah wishes the world to be destroyed in an environmental crisis. Allah ultimately is the one that is in control of our destinies. But the point is, we're in control of our choices individually. And we very much feel that that's what we're promoting here is an awareness, telling people to come and see what we do, to get involved and make small changes, as you say. So I can summarize it in the way that we summarize on the farm what we're doing. We try and focus on the food that we're eating. That's the starting point. Well, think about where your food comes from, even your vegetables, you know, frequent your local farmer's market, get to know people who are really connected to the land, eat less meat. Your energy and how you're using it. We know that's a major part of our lives. We know, and we've seen during lockdown, how we can change our habits and reduce the consumption, reduce the use of transportation, heating, etc. We have to split wood and chuck it in the boiler to get warm here on the farm. So often the solution is put on 3 jumpers. But if you're living in civilization, you just flick a switch and you get heating on demand. You know, think about where your energy comes from. And then the third area that we deal with on the farm as well is waste, how you recycle that waste. Every last bit of human manure on our farm is recycled, whether it's us or our customers, as well as using the animal manure, of course, for a very valuable use. People can't necessarily change that, but look at the waste you're using in your household, your plastics, your recycling. So take a look and do an audit. Each one of us now that's been at this meeting, just audit your energy use, your food consumption, and your waste. Think about small changes you can do in that regard. And ultimately that's saving animals, that's helping the environment, that's creating the change that we want to see.
Thank you. Jazakumullah khair to all our panel for their really inspiring comments and all our participants for their sort of feedback and questions, because clearly this is something that, you know, each one of us can take on an individual basis. We talk about human rights, as someone was saying, but it's human responsibility. What is the individual's responsibility, both individually as well as a community, in trying to sort of remedy this solution? I think if we look at ourselves, we look at the nafs, how we can sort of control the nafs, which is that's what Islam ultimately sort of guides us towards, is controlling the nafs. I mean, we look for comfort, but is there a way that will be maybe slightly less comfortable, but ultimately better for ourselves as well as the environment? So let's, each one of us, check our intentions and check the way we do things. And just on that final note, this session has been recorded, so those of you who'd like a copy can email us. And if you do have any follow-up questions, please do email us and we can direct them to one of our distinguished guests. Yeah. On that note, I'd like to thank everyone again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.